What's going on, guys? Welcome to the Stack String Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Daniel DeBrocke, and today I'm joined by a friend of mine, Lizzy Rawdah. Um, so, Lizzy, thanks for jumping on. Really excited to have you here. It's been a little bit since we've chatted face to face. Can you give a bit of a breakdown of who you are and just some of the things that you're doing at the moment?
Sure, no worries. And thank you for taking the time to pronounce my name. A lot of people mumble through the last name and hope that no one was really listening. So as Dan said, my name's Lizzy. I am currently a digital nomad, the co-director of a company called Flex Success, which mainly deals with one-on-one clients in a coaching capacity. But we also have a podcast, a couple of books, a couple of courses, some background on how I got here. I became a personal trainer back in 2008, so a very long time ago now, after really gaining a passion for fitness, because I think, honestly, fitness is the thing that turned my life around. I was dealing with some pretty heavy things as a kid and was partying a lot and all the drugs that came with it. And I could see my life going downhill. So I got into the gym, and that was really the start of a new life for me. And I wanted to pursue that. So I became a personal trainer, and I did face-to-face one-on-one sessions for nearly a decade. And in that time, I met the most amazing people, learnt so much, grew so much as a person, but decided to move to coaching, focusing more on nutrition, because I felt I had more impact there. As a personal trainer, my scope of practice was working on exercise, and I had very little control over how to coach my clients outside of that, their sleep, their nutrition. Of course, I could, maybe drink less often, maybe eat more fruits and vegetables, give general government guidelines, but it was outside of my scope of practice and my certifications to be guiding them more specifically. And although my clients were getting faster and stronger and feeling better, the body composition changes weren't really happening because a lot of that comes down to nutrition, right? So I was referring them to nutritionists, psychologists, chiropractors, whoever I needed to refer them to. But honestly, the nutrition side of things was still lacking. A lot of people weren't doing a great job, and I knew I could do a better job. And so while juggling uni and PT, I got certified for nutrition, moved online, and here we are. What is it, like 8 years into Flex Success? We now have a team of coaches and I think a long string of happy, successful clients. In that time, me being in the fitness industry for nearly 15 years, I've dabbled in jiu-jitsu and CrossFit, strongman, and accidentally made an Australian record because I didn't count properly the weight that was on the bar, which was a fun mistake. But for the most part, lifting weights like a bodybuilder. So I think that's the elevator pitch of who I am, perhaps.
I love how you accidentally set a strongman record in Australia.
I had to recount the bar like 3 times. Like, oh my God, are you kidding me?
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, so I think like what you and Dean are doing, I guess for context, Dean is the other owner of Flex Success, and yeah, the minor detail.
Yeah.
And so like I think what you guys are doing is really cool, because in order to travel that much and be in so many different environments, like you really have to have a good grasp on your nutrition, on your habits. You have to be very adaptable. And you have to have a lot of flexibility, not even just necessarily in the foods that you're eating, but also like just your general approach, like psychologically, like how you view food, how all these things are kind of interacting. So I always thought that was really interesting, especially seeing like just how often you guys are traveling. It's like literally every time I see your story, it's something crazy going on, which is really, really cool.
Thank you.
And I mean, like we'll get into a lot of the stuff related to adherence and sticking to things, but I guess one of the areas that I wanted to start off with was one of the things that you suggested, actually, kind of off camera previously, was slow versus fast progress. And I think this is something that is kind of funny, because when you talk about slow versus fast progress, the slow progress is always faster. And ends up being faster in the long run, but it's very difficult to wrap your head around it. And there's a lot of resistance and obstacles when you tell someone like what they're going to have to do, because I think there's this sort of assumption that when you hire a coach, you're just going to get all the hacks. They'll help you get really shredded, and then that's just it, and your life is kind of perfect from then on there.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you could kind of expand on that and how you approach uh, these conversations with your clients, and then what that might actually look like. Not necessarily talking about individual differences, but more so like a principled approach of how you come about that coaching experience.
Cool, cool. Like anyone that has a good idea of a topic, it's the annoying, like there's so much nuance and it depends. So really interesting topic, I think, and really useful because a lot of these conversations with our clients start with, okay, what do you want to achieve? Oh, 20 kilos weight loss. When would you like to do it by? Tomorrow would be great. So sometimes, well, a lot of the time, 1 week from now is better than 1 year from now in their minds. But like you said, they're not always aware of the things that need to be done, or they're not always willing to do the thing as well. So maybe a good place to start is by defining fast progress versus slow progress, I think. And a lot of people put this down to a number: 1 kilo a week, 2 kilos a week, 3 kilos a week. And a lot of people also, especially with hefty goals, have really big expectations for themselves, maybe based off shows like The Biggest Loser. Do you have that in Canada, where you're from, Dan?
I've I know of it, but I've never seen it before. But I
Okay.
know of it. It's with the Jillian Michaels and whatever.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And there's an Australian coach as well, or PT. I forget his name now. But anyways, people are losing 4, 5, 6 kilos a week. And I think sometimes people get their expectations set unrealistically from shows like that. So let's take a look at what slow and fast really means. It's not an absolute number, like I mentioned before. It's more of a percentage of body weight. So let's take an example of somebody let's take me and Dean as an example. Dean's 100 kilos, pretty damn lean. I'm 60 kilos, relatively lean for a female. If we want to go at a slow or a steady pace, call it 0.5% to 1% of our body weight per week. So 1% for Dean at 100 kilos, he's losing 1 kilo a week. For me, I'm losing 600 grams a week. It's not that he's doing better, it's that we're both losing 1%, but our body weights are lower to begin with, right? Anything above 2% of body weight loss per week, we could consider fast progress. Anything lower than about 0.5%, we could consider slow progress. And we'll get into why we might want to go fast or slow, the considerations in a moment. But it's worth thinking about how much you have to lose in the first place as to the speed you might want to go at. If somebody is quite overweight, is over fat, but not necessarily overweight. They have more fat to lose. Whereas someone like Dean, who's really, really lean, but might weigh a lot, has a lot of muscle, he might want to go a little bit slower because the fat he has to lose is a little less. At the end of a cut, Dan, you're at the end of a cut right now, aren't you?
Yeah, I think one more week.
Okay, cool. So things are probably starting to slow down for you?
No, actually, I had a period a while back where I hit that kind of hard plateau. I started getting GI issues and all that stuff, and that was rough.
Okay.
But then I implemented a gut protocol. After 2 weeks, I was good, and then same thing, just kept going. So I've been very lucky.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's awesome. What we find a lot of the time is at the beginning of a cut, people are losing really quickly because with something called false weight, they might be losing. Like water, for example, inflammation might be reducing because they're eating better. Things are moving quickly, but as they have less to lose, the scales might be slowing down. Maybe you've got some metabolic adaptations, maybe they're moving less because they're more fatigued, things like that. So the rate of loss depends on quite a few things, and those are some things to consider. When a client comes to us and says, I want to do this by next week, we could consider, do we want to actually do this quickly, or do we want to tackle this at a steady pace or even a slow pace? And first of all, we need to think, do we actually have the option to do either one? And what I mean by that is some people are pigeonholed into only having the option to go slowly. That might be because they have a history of yo-yo dieting And we know in the past, when they've tried to diet hard, they, what's a better word than snapping? They end up giving up the very restrictive habits that they can't sustain and going back to their old habits and therefore back to their old body. And so we know that that method isn't sustainable for them. Maybe they have a really low tolerance for stress. Maybe they have some priorities in their life that conflict with taking a fast approach. Things that are really important that they can't give up. Maybe they have to eat out for work, drink with their boss. They have kids they need to cook for whatever reason. They just don't have the time to always prep their food and things like that. So we need to consider, do we actually have the two options? If the answer is yes, then perhaps somebody who might want to go fast is someone who has a really short timeline. They have a wedding in 8 weeks, for example. They have a single event that they don't need to build sustainable habits for. Maybe they're trying to get on a bodybuilding stage. Maybe they have a really high tolerance to stress, so they can deal with things that are necessary, and they also have a good exit plan, because once you get there, what are you going to do? Otherwise, without an exit plan, it's like trying to straighten deck chairs on the Titanic. Like it's not going to work out for you. Or maybe if we want fast results, if we're talking about body weight, not necessarily talking about muscle gain here, different can of worms, kind of. It's somebody going through a recovery diet. So they've just gotten extremely lean. They're at unhealthy, unsustainable levels of body fat, and they want to gain that back quickly. So those are 4 reasons why we might want to consider a fast approach. You went on a fast approach, didn't you, Dan, for your cut?
Now I am. So just at the end, I am. I'm down 50 something pounds. So it's quite a bit. So like 25 kilos, basically.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. But most of that came off across like 7.5 months. So I just did a straight diet all the way through. But like during that time, I was very, very disciplined. So my step count, like every single aspect of my life was already tracked.
Okay.
So it's very easy for me to accommodate, which is one of the reasons why I didn't necessarily see that slowed progress up until the end when it just got kind of brutal in my gut. But then now I'm doing the last little bit, and I was just like, mentally, I'm just like, I can't go back into a long diet to lose it. Like I fucking hate bodybuilding. I hate it. I like lifting heavy, and I'm so much weaker than I used to be. Like I'm doing like 365 on the bench press, and I'm fucking struggling for like 5 reps. I'm like, this is brutal. And so I'm like, I just want to gain weight again. So I was like, fuck it. I'm just gonna do a really extreme cut for like 2 weeks, try and lose a bunch of weight, lean out, and then just be done with it. Because I just can't do anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. That's definitely one benefit to getting it done quickly. You don't have to do it for as long. You mentioned, it was after you pressed record, I'm pretty sure, that the slow way is often the fast way. Did you mention that after we pressed record?
Yeah.
Or after? Yeah. Now, the people that have a history of yo-yo dieting, trying to go really hard and then going back to old habits, they're back on again, they're off again, they're back on again, they're off again. They're taking 2 steps forward, at least 2 steps back, 2 steps forward, at least 2 steps back. And so taking a slower approach, we'll talk about some benefits in a moment, means that you're very unlikely to take backward steps. If you are, those backward steps are minimal, and we're ready and charged to take 2 more forward steps again. Now, a slower approach, as I mentioned, 0.5%, 1% body weight per week is reasonable. That's not particularly slow. I mean, think about where you'll be 6 months from now, losing 0.5% to 1% of body weight per week, like significantly leaner. Most people will be at least at their goal weight 6 months from now. And staying in old cycles of on again, off again, 6 months from now, you're likely to be at the same spot. So actually taking the slow and steady approach is going to get you there faster, even though it feels annoying in the beginning.
The funny thing too is that even though you differentiated between different rates of weight loss, like we didn't necessarily talk about what you would do as like a performance-based athlete, but just body composition. You're like, okay, these are some good proximal like ranges to sort of aim for. Even if you were to tell them about the fast rate of progress, like 2+% is very fast.
Yeah.
If you were to tell them that and then actually translate that into how many pounds or kilograms they're going to lose per week, that in their mind is still considered slow. They're like, what? I can't lose 10 pounds a week. Like, what are you talking? And you're just like, what?
Yeah.
Like, you know that you'd have to like cut off half your arm to lose that, right? Like, just think about what that means, you know?
Yeah, and we have fancy marketing and sexy sales tactics to thank for that. 10 pounds in 10 days, all your money back. What the hell? And people also, I think, when they say I want to lose weight, what they mean is I want to lose fat. And they're not always understanding the distinction between weight loss and fat loss. Yes, they're strongly correlated. If we're losing body fat and we're not gaining something else at the same rate, then the scales are going to be going down. But also, if people are going in very low calorie diets, like 30-40% deficit to their maintenance calories, I mean, we're at some pretty serious risk of muscle loss there. Loss of sanity, perhaps, as well. Insane hunger, mood disturbances, performance. You mentioned that, your bench is feeling really hard as well, and that's a common symptom. I mean, even shitty sleep, which has flow-on effects. So yes, some people can lose weight really fast. Is all of it fat? Unless they have their diet and their training like spot on, probably not. So when we break it down to this is how much you're going to lose per week, but hey, we want to go at this rate because we're trying to maintain as much muscle mass as we can while you're going through this fat loss phase. We're trying to reduce the symptoms of fatigue, mental preoccupation with food, hunger, reduce the risk of nutrient deficiencies, all of those things. Usually you can swing someone.
So you brought up a couple of things that are really, really important because let's say you are someone who's trying to just do this really aggressively
Okay.
and you want to drop, 30%, 40% of your calories, like some really big number. Well, what if you're you and you only weigh 60 kilos? Like just meeting your protein requirement is going to take up like 60-70% of your total calories. And then how are we going to get our micronutrients in? If we just get the micronutrients in, that might be 100% of calories if you're just eating like lots of veggies. So, you know what I mean? A lot of the times I don't think people necessarily look at a lot of those things, which are really important and can significantly change depending on body weight and your starting point, like a lot of different things. So it's like I coach a lot of small females who are performance-based athletes. And it's like, you know, I had similar conversations as you do, where it's like, hey, do you want to get super weak? And they're like, no. So it's a little easier for them because their performance is their number one priority, but
Yeah.
they're trying to kind of sustain a certain level of leanness just because like you want to look good and then they want to feel good and they want to perform well for their weight class. And so it's maybe a little bit easier for them, but then at the same time, that's one thing that I think a lot of people really don't understand, especially when they're making these recommendations like, oh, 20%, like 20% of your calories should be coming from protein. It's like, well, what if you only have like 1,500 calories to allocate? That's like what? Like, I don't know, 40 grams of protein or some shit? Like, I don't know what math is, but it's really, really low. So a lot of the times when these recommendations aren't necessarily contextualized, it can send people down a pretty bad path.
Yeah, definitely. So if somebody who's 100 kilos and has a fair amount of fat to lose cuts their calories by 30%, not as detrimental. There's still a fair few calories there, definitely enough to get their protein in, their fruit and veg, some carbs, some good quality fats. But like, as you said, what about me? What about my maintenance calories are 2,000? Not a lot, more than other girls at 60 kilos because I'm, I don't know, 16% body fat. Like I have more muscle mass for my weight than most other girls, but still.
You're also very active though. That's just kind of part of your lifestyle.
Yeah, no, I've over the years found ways to keep myself active without feeling like it's an effort. Like I just walk to the gym, whatever gym I decide to go to, I make it at least 15 minutes away. So there's 30 minutes of walking every time I train.
Side note, sorry to cut you off, but anyone who is listening should definitely check out the Flex Success podcast because you guys actually did a podcast specifically on this topic, talking about how you can increase your general activity without actually increasing your general activity, like without actively trying to make it work, right? So just little things like that. Definitely worth watching. I think you guys had some really, really great strategies that you said. But anyway, sorry.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for the plug. I found that really useful, even like catching up with friends instead of going out for lunch, like, hey, let's go for a dog walk. And then like I get some sun, I get some movement in, I get to catch up with my friend, and I don't feel like, oh, I'm spending so much time exercising. No, I'm not. I'm walking to the gym. I'm catching up with my friend. I'm sightseeing, all of these things. But where I was getting was before I was mentioning if someone who's 100 kilos and has lots of fat to lose, if they cut their calories by 30%, there's still plenty to play with. Me at 60 kilos, if I cut my calories by the same percentage, you mentioned like there's hardly enough just to fit my my protein in and my fruit and veggies. So I wanted to bring up the topic of discretionary calories and discretionary foods here. Whatever I have remaining after my must-haves for the day, I've got my protein in, I've got my fruit in, I've got my veg in, maybe some complex carbohydrates, some good quality fats. Those are sort of like my musts, regardless of what I'm trying to do, cut, gain, or maintain. After that, all the calories remaining are called discretionary calories. I would have very few if I'm cutting at my current weight, very few. Sometimes none. Sometimes all I'm eating is my must-haves, which we call the foundation diet at Flex Success. Dean, however, or someone who's 100 kilos would have, 1,200, 1,000, 2,000 calories remaining as their discretionary calories. So quite a lot. They have more to, maybe fulfill a craving, maybe go and eat out, just snack at their desk, have bigger meals. And if someone is cutting, because hunger is usually raised during a cut, we want to be choosing more satiating foods. Now, if I have 30 discretionary calories left over, I'm not using that on chocolate. What's that, like half a square? No, not even. It's like a little crumb of chocolate. I'm going to have some fruit. I'm going to, some diet jelly. I'm going to use those calories really wisely. Whereas someone who's heavier has the luxury of being less selective. So there's definitely a small people problem when it comes to that.
There definitely is. And yeah, it's funny. So like right now, I talked to you before we started recording about how busy I am. And maybe actually this is something potentially a really good thing that we can get into. But I'm on 100 grams of carbs, which I'm 240 right now, 240, 238, which is like 110 kilos, I think.
Okay.
Right. So I'm
1 gram of carb per kilo of body weight.
Huh?
That's 1 gram of carb per kilo of body weight.
Not even. Yeah. Not even. Right. It's crazy. Yeah. It's like 0.9 or something like that. So, it's pretty wild, but I've been so fucking busy, like so busy that I have had zero cravings just because I am too busy to even think about it. Like I was working before this. I'm on this podcast. I've got like a conference that I have to finish writing for. I've got other stuff I got to prep for. I got so much stuff that I have to do that I have zero hunger issues. And actually through most of my diet, even like that 7.5 month stint or whatever, cravings weren't really an issue because I was really intelligent with how I allocated my calories. So whole foods, lots and lots of fruits and veggies, good quality lean proteins, kind of like what you were saying. But then beyond that, I just kept myself super busy. Like I work a lot, I train a lot, and then I come home and I'm like, so I'll try and usually push a little bit more of my calories towards the end of the day. And so, just kind of going into different strategies that can help bolster adherence based on different individuals' lifestyles and things like that. Are there certain things that you've noticed, like, hey, I found these specific strategies I tend to recommend quite a bit to people because that's usually just kind of what they run into, right? Like, have you sort of noticed anything like that?
Tons. Where to start? I guess initially, if somebody comes to me and they've had multiple failed dieting attempts, I would figure out, okay, where are we going wrong? Are they trying to go too fast? And then, maybe we need to take a slower approach. But the next thing we would probably consider readiness. So when we consider readiness, there's sort of 3 things. Is it their willingness to change is low? Probably not if they're coming to you and they're trying to pay you for something. Is it that their confidence in their ability to change is low. Maybe if they've had multiple failed attempts, that makes sense. Or maybe it's that for whatever reason, they just can't actually go ahead and implement the actions long term that are necessary. Let's say it's the confidence thing, and somebody thinks to themselves, I can't portion control. I have no self control. My cravings are out of control. They just have no confidence in their ability. Cravings is a big one. Is that something that you also come up against with your clients as well? They just feel like their cravings are out of control, or maybe their hunger is out of control?
Um, not not a ton, but again, I don't I have like kind of a different demographic. So when I was working with people who were more body composition focused, definitely.
Uh-huh.
Um, but now I'm almost exclusively work with performance athletes.
Righty.
Even with people who are coming to me for weight loss, um, they still at least have like a secondary goal that's very important that's performance based. So there's a lot more wiggle room in terms of like their initial investment and like what they're prioritizing. So it is a completely different kind of
Gotcha.
approach you would take. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So as far as adherence is concerned, that is something that I come up against a lot with clients, hunger and cravings and their confidence. So I find it helpful to start small if confidence is low, because confidence, I guess, is built on repeat success. So what we want to show people is that you can be successful, you can do these things, but set the bar low so that it's achievable. And if they feel like invasive thoughts are getting in their way, like I have no willpower, I have no control over my cravings, it can help to put a sentence in front of that. I feel like I have no willpower. And it puts some distance between thoughts and reality, because I think a lot of shit that isn't true all the time. And like our thoughts aren't always true. And so by saying, I had the thought that I can't control myself when I have cravings, helps people realize that it's not necessarily true. And we can use something called the cravings thermometer if we're going to talk about cravings. And that's when we recognize that cravings or even hunger isn't a light switch. It's not a yes or no. I'm hungry, I'm not hungry, I have a craving, I don't have a craving. There's ranges. So the thermometer goes from 1 to 10. 1 is no craving at all, 3, 4, not very much. And we eliminate a 7 because, like, what's a 7? That's sort of this like mediocre, it's kind of strong, it's kind of not strong. So we get people to rate their craving. If it's a 6 or below, moderate, low, very low, maybe we're going to not fulfill this craving right now. If we're an 8 or above, strong, very strong, extreme, we will consider it. And that helps people eat craved foods less often. And we know that frequency of cravings is attached to frequency of consuming foods that are craved. So it's sort of this vicious cycle. So that helps people have fewer cravings, only fill them when they are feeling like the urge is very, very strong. But we can also employ a tactic called urge surfing. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it is for any sort of addictive behaviors, like eating like an asshole might be one of them. Also sex addictions, gambling addictions, alcoholism, things like that. And it's where we decide to no longer fight the urge, because people who have really strong cravings, I'm going to resist it, I'm going to fight it, I'm going to stop thinking about it. And studies show us that actually trying to push them away makes us focus on them more and makes them even harder to resist, which isn't very helpful. So urge surfing suggests that instead of fighting it, we accept it. Right now, I'm having an overwhelming urge to eat chocolate. I'm not trying to push it away. I know it's there. I acknowledge where it is. I'm feeling this urge somewhere around my stomach. It's making me feel X, Y, and Z. I'm going to breathe through it. And eventually, like a wave in the ocean, surfing the urge, the wave is going to pass on its own. And at first, this is really difficult to do. And where people go wrong is right at the peak of the wave, just before it passes. They're like, this is too strong, and they end up eating the thing or doing the thing. But if we practice urge surfing, the more we're successful at surfing urges, the less frequent and the less intense our cravings are going to get, and the easier it is to adhere to whatever plan we've decided is appropriate for us.
Yeah, that's a great point. So, I knew someone who used to use this tactic. I don't really use it myself just because I don't think I really have a need for it. But I thought it was a great idea where they were like, if you have an urge for like consuming chocolate or whatever it might be, you know, don't restrict yourself, but instead just say, you know what, I'm going to wait 1 hour.
Mhm.
And in an hour, if I still want this, then I'll have it. But I'm not going to fucking have this until an hour is over. And then you go and find something else to do. And then almost always in the hour, you're like, yeah, I don't really need that much, right? Because you're kind of creating that distance, exactly like you're saying. You're just sort of creating that time for things to sort of pass. And you're like, oh, okay, I'm fine. It's not that big of a deal. And one interesting thing that you were talking about as well, or sorry, you kind of mentioned, but I wanted to piggyback on was like cue reactive cycles. So, you have some sort of trigger, whether it's environmental, internal, doesn't necessarily matter, that triggers a certain type of like habituated behavior.
Mhm.
And what a lot of the research shows as well on that is if you've been doing that for a long time, the reward cascade that follows eating the chocolate or whatever actually somewhat becomes detached from the food itself and is more driven by the actual behavior. So if you were to go and eat, let's say you want to eat chips, right? Like, because chips have a certain texture. If you go and eat carrots or something with kind of like a similar texture, you know what I mean? Like there's a little bit of similarity there. Um, then that usually ends up satisfying it because you're just like, oh, I just wanted to do that thing. And so you can just kind of like replace the habit. And most of the time, that level of anxiety and stress that's building up will also kind of subside, which is probably also part of, I can't remember what you called it, surfing the
Urge surfing.
wave, urge surfing. Yeah, sure. Such an Australian thing to say. Um, yeah, but no, I think that's really great advice
In
for.
Australia, we had a campaign called "Don't Stop It, Swap It." It was a government initiative to get people moving and eating better. And basically, it was exactly what you were saying. If usually at 3 o'clock you just feel a bit bored and peckish, and usually you go and eat a Mars bar, don't swap it. Don't stop it. Just swap it for an apple. You're still engaging in a behavior that's somehow self-soothing, or because breaking habits are really difficult to do. But what if we could swap it for something more helpful? Like the apple isn't taking away from helpfulness; it's adding to it. It's
Yeah,
giving us fiber. It's giving us micros. So sometimes giving a catchy jingle, "Don't swap it, stop it," can be a good way for people to remember these things.
that's awesome. So corny. But yeah, no, it's 100. You're 100% right. So it's January. I don't know why
Mhm.
I thought it was way later in the year. I guess it's just like a lot has happened. um, but people are still on their New Year's resolution kicks. They're jumping
Mm,
in the gym. They're starting their diets, all this stuff. And you know, I always see kind of like mixed reviews. I see people being like, well, like don't make New Year's resolutions. And I hear other people who are like, well, I mean, if it's helping them out, like I'm hesitant to say don't make a New Year's resolution, even if it's only temporary, because it's like it's still a tool. Like motivation's still a tool.
okay.
I kind of tend to fall in that camp a little bit. But that being said, I think, other individuals still have a pretty good point of how are we going to transition this from some sort of, burst of motivation into something that's a little bit more lasting.
Mm,
And so when you get someone who is kind of in that headspace of, okay, I'm ready to do this, I'm ready to go, they've got a very high degree of motivation. How do you capitalize on that and show them fast results if that's appropriate for them, but then also kind of lay the foundation for them to actually beyond that have
mm,
some sort of um, you know development of skills and understanding and education around what they need to do to create the sustainability around what they've accomplished in that short period of time, or even if it's only part of their goal that's been reached.
okay. So January 1, as you know, as you just said, everyone's on their health kick. But I think when people decide to reach out for coaching, they also feel that surge of motivation because it's, the fresh start effect. Monday's the new day. January 1 is the new thing. The beginning of my coaching is the beginning of new me. Um, a lot of people have extrinsic motivators. They're revenge body. They just broke up with their ex and they want to look really hot, or they've got a wedding coming up, or they feel excluded from their social group and maybe they'll get more attention if they look hot. Whatever the reason, extrinsic motivators are excellent fuel sources to turn the engine on. They never last long. So maybe I'll touch on two things. I think an important way to help clients stay motivated long term after that initial surge of motivation has passed, because it always passes, is to think about what are the intrinsic motivators that might keep me going. An example of that is, you mentioned, Dan, that Dean and I travel a lot. We actually don't have a home. We just have a suitcase, and we just, like, every few weeks or few months choose a new country. And the extrinsic motivators that keep me personally going is they're all value-based. There's not a date that's going to pass. It's not reliant on people giving me more attention or more likes. And although values might adjust over time, we always have values. So my values to continue training, and we can help our clients find their values as well, is I want to be independent until the day I die. I don't want someone wiping my ass and feeding me and getting my groceries for me. I want to do that shit. And the day that I can't do that, I don't want to be here anymore. And I know that eating well and exercising and moving my body in a way that nourishes it and doesn't punish it is going to achieve that value. I'm continuously working towards it. I also really value freedom and spontaneity. I want to have the freedom to do any activity at the drop of a hat. Do you want to climb this mountain? Yes. Do you want to go skiing? Yes. Like, I'm fit enough to do any of these things. And so helping our clients identify what values are really important to them and how we can connect that to nutrition, exercise, recovery, like generally being good to ourselves, can be a really helpful long-term tool. I have a second one, but maybe I'll stop talking for a moment in case there's any interjection.
No, I just thought it was funny when you were talking about, like, you want to maintain your sort of physical freedom, and you're like, and then once I don't have that anymore, like, I don't want to be here. And then I was thinking
I'm going to Switzerland and taking
our conversation the other day.
Yeah, I'm all for ending it while I still have my dignity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And this is not a call for help. I'm not at all suicidal. I'm just saying I really value my independence.
No, keep going. I don't have anything to interject at the moment.
Okay, cool. So the second point that I was going to make on the question of how do we keep clients going long term is, you've read Atomic Habits.
Yeah.
Okay, so for those of you that haven't, listeners, definitely do. James Clear, I don't know if he came up with this concept, but he definitely popularized it. It's being process focused, not outcome focused. Now, when clients come to us, they're really focused on how much weight they lose every week. And they are good people or bad people, according to them, based on did the scale go up or down that day. They had a successful or a failed week based on did the scale go up or down that day. Now, these are the outcomes we're trying to achieve. But really, we shouldn't be focused on the outcomes because we can't control them. We can only influence them. The things that are within our center of control, the things we really should be focusing on. And as coaches, we have the influence to help direct our clients' attention towards the things that really matter. And that are the process variables, not the outcome variables. So as a coach, with our client check-ins, we ask them all sorts of questions. Qualitative, how do you feel this week? How was your digestion? How do you think your sleep was? What went well? What do you think you could have done better? But we also look at things like, how many daily steps did you do? Does that match to your daily step target? Did you get all your training sessions in? What was your protein intake? And as coaches, we congratulate our clients on such a successful week if all of the process variables were ticked. They ate their protein, they did their training, they had great sleep, like stress reduction, whatever the things are we're working on. It's not that we'll never mention the outcome. We might give a quick congratulations or, hey, hang in there, the scales will respond soon. But drawing people's attention to the process or the systems and getting them to focus on that and then counting that as success or failure really helps people hang on when the scales are being stubborn, or I don't know, things aren't moving for a period of time, instead of losing motivation just because of a shitty weight loss week.
Yeah, there's definitely something to be said about like just momentum, because there there's so there's so much that happens behind the scenes, especially because you're not just starting from here. Like, so for instance, most Americans, I think, gain, what is it, 2 kilos, around 2 kilos every year or something like. So it's like you're talking about, like, or sorry, I think it's 1 kilo per year, 1 to 2 kilos. So in 10 years, you're talking about like 10 to 20 kilos gained, right?
Not
And
muscle.
like, yeah, muscle, exactly. Of fat. And so it's like people are already headed in this direction. And so when they don't see the immediate weight loss, it's like, no, 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 you don't understand. Like, you're having to dig yourself out of a hole first before we can start to get in there. And that process of reaching critical mass can be very difficult, because someone who is not dieting at all, not doing anything, but let's say even if they're remaining weight stable, they're doing nothing, right? But then you start dieting and you have to pay attention to the types of foods you're eating. You've got to pay attention to how many steps you're taking. You got to pay attention to your hydration. So there's all these different things now that you're having to do. And you might still remain weight stable for several weeks, because even though you're building these habits, it hasn't reached critical mass yet for it to actually turn over into weight loss.
Mm,
And people can understand this from the standpoint of like marketing or business, where it's like you just need to market, 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 market. And you might only get like one little thing here and there, but eventually, if you keep going, it's going to blow up. And then you'll have a steady stream of like clients and revenue and all this stuff. But you have to stay consistent. And it's very difficult for someone who's gone from doing nothing to now they're fucking working all the time on this one thing, and they're just not seeing the results yet, or they're not seeing the results that they wanted.
yeah.
And so that can be very difficult to sort of accept. And so I think that coaching relationship is so incredibly important, because then, once they give you your trust, or sorry, once you earn their trust, you can actually have those conversations and be like, well, look at how much you're doing, look at how much you feel better. And even if the scale's not going down, generally, if they're doing all these things pretty well, they will notice a difference in how they look, how they feel. Maybe their clothes fit differently. Even if the scale is kind of like, there's a bit of a latency period between enacting these behaviors and actually seeing, the more objective results.
Mhm.
It's tricky, but it's yeah, it can be pretty deflating sometimes when you get that, if you're not aware of why that's happening.
Oh yeah, and I think it's really a coach's responsibility to explain that
Usually.
there's a huge lag time between action and outcome. And there's other reasons why scales go up and down outside of weight loss and gain. And maybe you did lose fat this week, but maybe there's some inflammation, or maybe you didn't do as big of a poo this morning, and that's why the scales haven't moved. Like, there's so many reasons. But on that note, I feel like it's also the coach's responsibility to establish an environment of psychological safety with the client, where the client knows that they don't have to be perfect and that they will make mistakes. And when they do, those mistakes aren't necessarily holes, but they can be portholes to finding better ways. Telling their coach, hey, this is what happened. And together, the coach and the client can come up with a strategy. Well, next time this occurs, because usually things don't happen just once, what could you do better? And it's always better to ask the client than tell them, because
Mhm.
they know themselves better than you know them, and they can come up with their own solutions. They're smart. We want to build their problem solving skills. We want to build their confidence in their own ability to come up with solutions, instead of just always relying on you. Because Dan, you probably know some coaches out there that are like, I'm looking to work with only highly motivated individuals. They fire their clients at the first mistake, and people end up not admitting the mistakes that they make, and therefore don't always work through them. They just end up lying to their coach, and things don't end well. And I always think coaches that only want to work with those people, you're not a coach. Like, maybe you're giving advice that makes you a consultant. Either you don't want to coach, or you just don't know how to.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I'll see coaches all the time. I mean, again, not as much anymore, just because I don't think that the people, like the circles we kind of hang out in, really have many of those people, but you definitely see it every now and then where a coach will be like, "Oh, look at my client, like, they're here because of me," and da, 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 and they take all the responsibility and all the credit for their successes. But then if they fail, they're just like, "Oh, well, you're just not dedicated." It's like, well, that's pretty convenient, you know what I mean? So like, I don't know. If ever I have a client who's doing really well, like, yes, it's because of my programming. That's definitely influencing it. But I've given tons of people programming who didn't do a fucking thing and aren't getting any results. So it's like, you know, you have to kind of take it with a grain of salt. So anytime someone hits like a big PR, I'm always like, man, if I post up, which is pretty, I don't really post client stuff online, but if they tag me in it, I'll sometimes post it up and I'll be like, hey, great job. Like this person works so hard, and is doing phenomenal. Like, but I always try and give the credit to them because
They just
realistically, like it is them. I'm giving them the information, giving them the resources, I'm giving them all the stuff, but they are the ones who have to put in the work, be disciplined, learn the skills, educate themselves, and actually make it happen. And so it's like, I'm part of it, but it's definitely not mostly me. It's
mm,
like, like you said, you're presenting that environment of like feeling, and I know it sounds kind of lame or whatever when you say like, oh, a safe space, but it actually really is pretty important. Like you genuinely do have to treat athletes kind of like kids in the sense of, when they're doing something and you see them like doing something well or heading the right direction, you're like, hey man, you know what? Great job. I know that you said you were, you went off your diet, but let's look back. Like last time you did this, it was way worse. And you gained like 8 pounds over the weekend. But this time, just because like food, water, sodium, all that
yeah,
shit. But like this time you went off, but you remained weight neutral. That's a massive win. So
huge.
you can see that you're heading in the right direction. So I wouldn't worry about it. I wouldn't do anything other than just get back to your regular diet, congratulate yourself for acknowledging that. And hey, let's continue this progress down the road. And it's like, I'm talking to them kind of like they're a little bit more of a kid, but that's real. That's actually what you need. And everyone I've talked to is like, oh, you need to be hard on me. I'm like, nah, you're going to go real hard for like 3 months, then you're going to burn out. So I'm going to not do that. And instead, I'll just use like what I think is probably going to be best. And then after a while, they're like, yeah, I really like your approach. I'm like, yeah.
For sure.
Like,
Isn't that the art of
that's
coaching?
it.
Knowing when to give someone a hug or when to kick them up the ass.
Yeah. Yeah. That's super important because simultaneously, I've had other times where I've had an athlete who, because I'm normally very soft spoken to my clients and my athletes, especially if I'm doing like video reviews and stuff like that. I always try and say, like, highlight the good things that they're doing and I'll always try and frame what they need to work on in like a constructive manner. Um, but then there definitely are times, they're pretty few and far between, to be honest. But there are times where like someone will say something and I'll be like, hey, look, you're being a fucking pussy. I don't want you cutting sets like that. The weight moved really well and you just bitched out. So next time that happens, just leave the gym. Because you know what I mean? Like if that's what you're gonna do, just leave the gym. Don't even do anything else. Right? Just quit. Right. And then they get the message real quick and they're like, oh shit, and I gotta get back. Like if Daniel is like
It's still standard.
Daniel's getting angry, then
Yeah,
then I better fucking get back on it. Because I know a lot of people think I'm like this big mean guy, but I'm actually very, very soft spoken and very like nice, especially when I'm coaching. So
it's an
maybe not like,
important skill to have.
huh?
It's an important skill to have, I think, because if
Yeah.
you're always an asshole, it kind of loses its impact. It's like using the C word too often. Like it's so impactful because it's hardly said.
That's a really good point, actually. Yeah. It's like when you see someone who's normally really calm and then they're kind of like, they kind of like step up a little bit, you're like, oh, across the line. Yeah.
Oopsie daisies.
Yeah, exactly. So I wanted to know if there was any particular area that's related to fitness, either directly or indirectly, that you're particularly interested in. I know we've had a lot of conversations about books and courses and stuff like that, but I've always found that like the more that I learn about like PTSD or trauma or disordered eating or like drug or substance abuse or mental health, like that helps me so much in my coaching practice and in my educational practice and how I'm delivering information, how I'm writing articles or, speaking at seminars or whatever. And I was wondering if there's anything, like I said, whether it's directly or indirectly related to fitness that you're particularly interested in or passionate about at the moment.
Right now, I'm really interested. I know this sounds very general, but soft skills. So, when we think about the skills that are necessary for a coach, obviously we need to be organized and all of that stuff. We need to have the hard skills of understanding the science. But the soft skills is the other side of that, which is how we can get our clients to actually implement this thing, how we can help them overcome emotional eating, help them change their mindset around nutrition, around their bodies, things like that. What I found very, very helpful, though, which sounds unrelated, is being a bit more human, which has, not on purpose, but it's allowed my clients to open up to me, and I can see the deeper reasons why they're doing things. Let me expand. I don't know, when was it? Maybe like a year ago, I spoke about being diagnosed with PTSD and my extensive history with domestic violence. And at the time, it really didn't have anything to do with nutrition. I was just talking about the stuff on my personal page. And clients have come to me and have told me about their history of child abuse or their rape or their, really traumatic experiences. And then this is why, Lizzy, I'm overweight, because I don't want men to look at me. I'm scared. And, then, okay, so this is the reason. Let's go to a psychologist and work on that. And then then they don't feel fearful when they feel sexy. And so I've really found that interesting. And it was definitely a unintended consequence of being a little bit more open and human. Also, I spoke about my binge eating disorder that I developed in the process of a comp prep that I did like a lifetime ago, many moons ago. And being able to relate to trauma, relate to eating disorders, I definitely don't think makes me soft, but makes me understand that it's not always an excuse. There's usually pretty legitimate reasons that people are doing the things they're doing, and everything they're doing is actually a solution to what their problem is, but it's also causing problems as well. So how can we go about actually resolving whatever problem they're trying to solve without causing more problems?
Mm-hmm.
So soft skills would be the summary.
That definitely makes a lot of sense. And I can see how that would increase, because I've honestly had a pretty similar experience. Even just if I think when I'm doing like the weekly check-ins or whatever that I do, I'll kind of be on video, and if they say something, I'll be like, you know what, honestly, this is really common. I've kind of experienced something really similar myself. It does sort of like bridge that gap of relatedness. And I mean, that comes back to kind of one thing you didn't call it self-determination theory. You talked about like building confidence through experience, or sorry, successes, and like self-efficacy. But relatedness is also a huge element of building self-efficacy and self-determination theory. And so, that totally makes sense. And I can see why someone would relate to that, because then it's like, oh shit, this person's gone through all those problems. I have those problems. They're probably going to be a pretty good individual who understands me, because they have the outcomes. They seem to have the education, the results, and they've gone through similar experiences and similar, trials and tribulations. And so I think that resonates with a lot of people, especially nowadays when everything's so fucking fake. People pretend to be like these awesome people, and then you find out behind closed doors there's like doing really shady shit, and like, yeah, it's just, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, are you familiar with the term like armchair philosopher or armchair scientist, something like that?
Oh, very much so.
Okay, so for listeners that aren't familiar with the term, it essentially refers to somebody that just theorizes and tells you what to do and what should be done, but hasn't actually done the thing themselves. Is that your understanding of an armchair coach? Or whatever?
I made a post about this literally yesterday. Yeah. So
was that one about the bodybuilding coach that isn't jacked, or a nutrition coach that's fat? That one?
Yeah, I was just like, be skeptical of getting fitness advice from fat nutritionists, skinny hypertrophy coaches, weak strength coaches, and researchers with no athletic background.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I think that there are lots of armchair scientists, lots of armchair coaches, armchair PTs who are trying to help their clients deal with problems that they themselves haven't been through. Because we know, like, we can read a book about how to squat, but until you've actually got under the bar, how are you going to cue that? How are you going to set up expectations? I think somebody needs to go through it. And it's not like you can only be a good coach if like you have an extremely traumatic history. Of course, that's not true. But I think that clients have a lot of, what's another word for buy-in that might make more sense to people?
They're just more invested.
yeah, okay, more invested, because they see that like, oh, I have this emotional eating issue, and I know there's all these theories around how to get over it, but my coach has been there and understands what it feels like and knows that it's not an excuse. And they're not an armchair coach. So I think the more experiences you can have as a coach, the better you'll be. Like, I have no dreams or aspirations of getting on a bodybuilding stage again. Like, that is well and truly behind me. But I'm really comfortable sitting at my current leanish physique and maintaining my strength. Like, doing these things are really comfortable for me. They're ingrained, they're part of my lifestyle, but I know that my clients feel really uncomfortable. And so what was it, like 2 years ago, I was like, let's put yourself in an uncomfortable situation. And I ended up doing this pretty savage cut for a photo shoot. I'm not really into photo shoots, but I'm also really awkward in front of the camera. So like, that was really uncomfortable. So I wanted to, because I'm telling people to do these things, and I'm like, it's fucking easy. Just like eat more vegetables, go for walks every day. But like, it's not easy for them. So I wanted to do things where I could put myself in their shoes. Not that they're necessarily getting dick skin lean for a photo shoot, but their shoes in the sense of like how they feel. And I think that's super important as a coach. Like, okay, you don't want to get on a bodybuilding stage, fine. At least get that lean if you're trying to get your clients that lean.
Yeah, well, I mean, it goes back to that expression, like the map is not the terrain. Like you can read everything you want about it, but until you get in there, it's just there's so much stuff that you'd have no possible idea. There's no way to know it outside of just experiencing it.
Yeah.
And I think that there's just so much that can be garnered from that. And I mean, yeah, I don't really think I need to expand on it.
Coaches just go and do the thing. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. It's like, would anyone feel comfortable going to a surgeon who has read everything and knows everything and can give you every single answer, but he's never performed a surgery, and now he's going to perform the surgery that he specializes in, but it's his first time and it's on your heart? It's like, no, fuck no. Oh, okay. So you admit then that there's something intrinsically valuable about individual experience. Okay, good. Then you agree with everything I'm saying. So fuck off.
We get these, I don't know if they're bots or what, but all the time on the Flex Success page. I mean, we're no celebrity. We've got like 10,000 likes, whatever. We get people being like, hey, do you want to increase your exposure? And I go and check out their page. You've got like 300 followers. Look, I don't think I'm going to go with you. But
yeah, I get that. I get that every now and then as well. That's awesome. So we're coming up on that hour mark, and I want to be respectful of your time. So I appreciate the conversation. It was really, really great. I think there's a lot of great takeaways for the listeners, and also it was just really great to catch up. So where can people find you?
Me personally, in Mexico City right now. What is my Instagram handle?
Flex Coach Lizzy, I believe.
Thank you. Yes, you're right.
That's fucking brutal that you don't know your own Instagram.
I don't search for myself very often. I also don't know my phone number. Flex Coach _Lizzy with a Y. And you can find Flex Success, Flex_Success on Instagram. Soon to be expanding to other platforms, currently mainly just Instagram. And in the link in bio, you can see all the links to our resources, apply for coaching, our books, our courses, our podcast. It's all there.
Awesome. So I'm going to put all that stuff. I'm going to put Lizzy's Instagram, their company, Flex Success, and then I'm also going to put the link to their link tree, so you guys can check out all that stuff. Definitely go make sure you give them a follow. They put out lots of great content on a regular basis, and again, they have a podcast and lots of great stuff. So, yeah, Lizzy, thanks so much for jumping on. It was great to have you.
It was an honor to be asked, because you have some pretty intimidating names on your podcast, so I'm glad to be amongst them.
Yeah, no worries. See ya.
Bye.